And good morning, Daily Dose, I-24 News edition to start your day and the place to be. Maybe it's so much so if you're Australian, okay? We're going to touch on Australia and the next visit of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, for years, the Australian Jewish community and the growing community of Israeli expats have eagerly anticipated a visit by an Israeli Prime Minister or President. Now, no Israeli Prime Minister has yet visited Australia. That's a true fact. In fact, I think the last visit to Australia was in 2005, Mr. Sharma?
That's right, yeah.
Right, okay. Luckily for me, the man to answer that question of when was the last official visit of an Israeli to Australia is the Australian ambassador to Israel, Mr. David Sherman. I want to thank you so much for being with me in studio.
It's a pleasure.
I know. Do I look frazzled?
You look great as always.
Where were you when I was developing self-esteem? That's what I want to know. Mr. Sherman, first of all, how many years have you been ambassador to Israel?
3.5 years I've been out in Israel
now. Last time an Israeli official visited Australia was 2005. That was President Moshe Katsav, a pomp and circumstance position, as we say here.
That's right.
Yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu was supposed to go himself, cancelled again, postponed now. Jews in Australia aren't happy.
Look, I think I'd say they're very much looking forward to this visit from Prime Minister Netanyahu. There has never been a sitting Israeli Prime Minister visiting Australia in 69 years now of the relationship. There's a very strong and Zionistic Jewish community in Australia.
Very big.
Big, growing Israeli expatriate population as well, but also beyond that, there's a lot of Australians who are passionate supporters of Israel outside the Jewish community and who value the friendship that we have. So I think this will be a great visit, and I'm very much looking forward to it happening.
You're very much looking forward to it happening. What do you think will be discussed in that visit?
Look,
other than the great, because the great relationship, and there's a fondness between the two sides and whatnot, but what's on the agenda?
Look, obviously Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Washington this week. He's having his first meeting with the Trump administration. He'll be coming to Australia almost immediately after that visit. We'll be keen to hear from him the sorts of things he discussed with the Trump administration, and in particular the sorts of vision they've got for advancing the two-state solution. The
two-state solution. And here you said the million-dollar world, because overnight there was news coming out of Washington that the President of the United States is not necessarily going to push the two-state solution as the only path to resolution. Is that something Australia, do you think, will go for as well? Because, for the last 20 years, it was a two-state solution.
Yeah. Look, I've seen those comments out of Washington. I think it was a White House official on background. I mean, I think we'll wait to see what President Trump has to say in his press conference. I would say, though, that our position since Oslo, really, in Australia, has been in support of a two-state solution. We're certainly open to hearing what the two parties might want, the Israeli side or the Palestinian side, and we're open to new ideas, but as far as we can tell, the best way to realise the national aspirations of both people and to ensure they live in peace and security alongside one another is a two-state solution.
Is a two-state solution, because Australia did vote for the recognition of a Palestinian state in the UN. I'm assuming that's something that's going to continue as a path forward, correct?
Actually, we abstained on this question when it came up in the General Assembly.
Shows you what journalist I am.
But I wouldn't expect you to know our voting record in the UN.
No, still.
It's a complicated institution.
But, absentee, but still that means, you know what it translates to the world. Essentially that translates that to recognize a Palestinian state is something, Australia is not for that, or is it?
No. And look, I think we believe that a Palestinian state can and should only come about by direct negotiation between the party. Having it imposed from the outside is not the right thing to do, but we also don't think it would be a sustainable thing to do. So I think we're in favour of direct negotiations towards a two-state solution.
Towards a two-state solution. Now, because you're Australian and I'm half American and we're sitting in the studio, I'm the weirdest anchor you've ever met, I know. But because we're sitting in the studio, I have to ask you about the American president and, how should I put it, the Australian incident of several weeks ago. Where's that heading?
Look, I think...
because we covered it and the rest of the world covered it.
Of course.
And it sounded like a phone conversation, which I know you probably don't know much about, but it didn't sound like a good phone conversation. Where does that stand? And will Australia stand by things it signed with the Obama administration when it comes to refugees, when it comes to, migrants?
Yeah. Look, I think what we're focused on is the outcome of that phone call, which was a commitment to honour the agreement that the Australian government struck with the then Obama administration.
Right.
But we're also focused on the future of the relationship. And look, the Australia-US relationship is long-standing. It goes beyond any particular president or prime minister. It's an alliance, and it's a commitment that goes back, well over 100 years. So, there will be turbulence at times in these sorts of relationships. I didn't hear the phone call. I can't attempt to characterise it.
Neither of us
I've
did.
seen it, but I don't think I've seen what President Trump has tweeted since, and certainly what my own prime minister has said since, indicates a desire for both of them to keep the alliance between our two countries strong and to keep working towards common objectives and common interests.
And do you think that agreement will be held, the agreement that was signed with the former administration?
From what I understand, it will be, yes.
It will be held in that respect. Okay. And back to Israel and Australian relations. And the partnerships, what kind of partnerships are we looking for when it comes to Israel? And I'm going off the attack. What kind of? And it wasn't an attack.
I can relax.
Yes, sit back. It's the Middle East, exactly. But what kind of cooperations are we looking to expect from that meeting between the Israeli Prime Minister, who I think this time will not cancel his trip, and the Australians?
So look, I think we're growing the high-tech innovation and cyber partnerships between our countries. I think there's a lot of interest from both leaders and both governments to do more in this area. Israel's got one of the most vibrant, successful and active startup scenes in the world.
Right.
Australia needs to have a better startup scene. We recognise that. We realise there's a lot we can learn from Israel there. So I think the Prime Ministers will be discussing that. Okay. Cyber, the challenges but also the opportunities of cyber is something that both leaders have recognised and discussed in the past. And Israel's a world leader in cyber security. And I think our Prime Minister and Israel's Prime Minister will be discussing that as well and talking about mechanisms to advance cooperation and what's an emerging opportunity but also an emerging risk for sovereign states.
For sovereign states. How many more years do you have here?
Another half a year till the summer.
How would you describe your experience here?
It's been amazing.
Why?
I mean, Israel is such a vibrant, energetic country that you learn so much in such a short time, and you sort of feel like you live life to the highs and the lows, the extremes on both sides. And I think it's partly the circumstances in which people live. Look, you obviously live with a degree of uncertainty in Israel, and you sense the sort of the lack of friendliness around your neighbour, the hostility on Israel's borders.
Exactly.
And I think it means that people sort of embrace life much more fully than they might in other countries where news is sort of less consequential and less existential and things happen more slowly. So I often say, a year spent living in Israel is like a decade in Australia.
Wow. Well, I'll take that. I'll probably be moving with you to Australia. Sorry, a joke. Don't worry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Mr. Sharma, Australian ambassador to Israel. We'll be right back.